Welcome to those who just joined the second day of our DASH meeting at ICS. We will continue our work with the three presentations. The first will be delivered by Sonia Alves, and following her, we are honored to host presentations from two invited speakers. Nuno Travassos. Nuno is an architect, assistant professor at DARC, University of Coimbra, and a researcher at the University of Porto. His research mainly focuses on contemporary urbanization processes, housing policies, and spatial planning practices. Then we will have Patricia Canelas. She is course co-director and lecturer for the Masters in Sustainability Urban Development at the University of Oxford. Her research and teaching seek to advance knowledge on the dynamic relationship between the public, private, and civic sectors involved in the governance of value creation or destruction and capture through the built environment. So thank you very much for traveling and being here and spending your time with us. I haven't introduced Sonia because, of course, we all know her very well. And I will give you the floor, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. Warm welcome. And once again, thank you for attending the seminar. My presentation is going to be really brief. It's divided in two parts. The first part, I will give an overview of the DASH project. The second part, I will very briefly again present the goals for today's seminar. So this is the DASH project consortium. We are 4 countries: Denmark, Germany, Portugal, and Serbia. And we are 3 sectors: academia, municipality, and the private organization, not-for-profit organizations. I definitely invite you to visit our website to get to know all the consortium's members and to subscribe our newsletter, where you will be able to understand more about our work. But if I had to identify the 3 main research objectives, I would say to facilitate knowledge sharing and critical reflection about innovative approaches in housing delivery. I would say that what is special about our project is we are not trying to find the best practice to replicate elsewhere, because we understand the artificially that underlies that idea. We most are more interested in understanding the legacy from the past in what is related to policies and practice in each local authority, national government, etc. We are very much interested in understanding the difference in housing systems and models, and to exploit complementary competences and synergies between partners. We believe that a discussion on the transfer of practices demands this work of understanding the difference and requires co-production to generate new ideas about how to promote safe and social housing. So we have developed a methodology that is very much based on the Marie Curie staff exchange requirements in terms of what can be funded, and what can be funded is international staff exchange between different institutions that work in different sectors. So, for example, the ECS staff travels, because we are academic sector, travels to another country and we are hosted by other institutions in another sectors. A municipality, a housing project, or a housing cooperative, this is the idea. And by doing that, by understanding other institution, people's practice, we can improve our understanding of things. And that is really what is special about the DASH project. So everything it's about sharing talks, sharing presentation, organizing events, and most of them, I would say, most of them, yes, they are available in our website. So here is the information regarding where you can find us, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. I don't know the name of the other. What is the name of the other? TikTok. No, not TikTok yet. X. Now it's X. Okay. And soon YouTube. We hope we will be sharing also these talks from today. So please, as Zlata from Serbia and the responsible for dissemination usually says, like, share, and subscribe, please. So today's objectives. We invited, and Alda will introduce our keynote speakers. We invited these keynote speakers to help us to understand better formal modes of cooperation between the public and the private sector. We would like to understand how certain concepts, just to give an example, public-private partnerships, or the concept of affordable rents in Portugal means, how it was constructed, socially constructed by certain interests and by certain actors. And we would like to promote a discussion on how some factors, political factors, but related to organization, governance, etc., affect the success of these programs that were designed at certain levels. We will see, Patricia will present one that was designed at a local level, the city of Lisbon, and Nuno will talk, I believe, about one that was promoted by the government, and we will tell us a bit about the implementation of this program. And basically that's it. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
So good morning. First I want to thank the invitation, and as Sonia was saying, I will speak a little bit about a more or less recent program in Portugal called the Affordable Rental Program, which is a kind of a trial of the public sector to involve the private sector in creating this intermediate, this middle range rental market segment. I have here a first part of a historical context, which I'm just passing by to save some time, but the idea was just to point out that in Portugal, housing is mainly in the hands of the private sector. It's not part of our welfare state. Our welfare state was built in a moment when housing was already being taken out of the system. Only 2% of our housing stock is public housing. We have a fairly small and stagnant rental market, and all these years of betting on a system of credit and private sector, also with a subsidized credit system, created an economic development model really dependent on real estate, on banking sector, on foreign debt. And this means that Portugal was in a vulnerable point when the financial crisis hit. So real estate, banking, credit, and foreign debt. So we had it all, and when it hit very hard, 1/3 of the construction companies went bankrupt, and the construction basically stopped. There was a time when the government tried to change the economic model, but really fast the idea was to trying to support it by redirecting the sector towards urban renewal, also supported by tourism. So this meaning that we all know that internationally we are in a moment of housing crisis. This is in general a result of an international context of the financialization of housing, and also the change of the dynamics of investment that came in the aftermath of the financial crisis. So this is general, but in Portugal we added to that a profound change in our legal frame. And as I was saying, the main aim, the main goal of these changes was to boost the tourism sector and to support urban and promote urban renewal as a way to boost the economy and overcome the crisis. And this was done mainly through tax incentives, foreign investment attraction programs such as Golden Visa, and mainly liberalization and deregulation of the construction sector, of the tourism sector, and mainly of the rental market sector, which is completely changed in order to achieve this. And the result was mainly the amount of investment in real estate was, as I showed before, lower because construction nearly stopped. But what happened was that this investment was concentrated in small points, mainly Lisbon, Porto, and Algarve, and in renewal, in the renewal sector, and in tourism and luxury housing segments. So here I have this to the north, but we could have exactly the same to the area of Lisbon. Before the crisis, let's say, the investment was distributed, dispersed throughout the territory. After the crisis, it was completely concentrated. The scale of the colors is exactly the same. It's completely concentrated in the main centers and mainly in Porto, and here is much more intense than it was before. So the result was intense transformation of these areas, and added value of the land, and the prices, mainly in the rental market, just start rising dramatically and not being followed by the increase in the income of the households. So the study I'm going to show you was made in 2019, so it is not really recent. So the moment was this one we have there in the graph. Since then, things didn't got better. So, but still, the data I'm going to show you is the previous one. So then we have to imagine what changed since then. So with the rise in prices, we had public protests and demonstrations, and the government had to do something to react to it, and it created what it called a new generation of housing policies, which had as stated main goals guarantee decent housing for all. And this for all is important because this means that until this moment, it was understood that public spending, public sector would only work with this really small area of public housing, which amounts to 2% of our housing stock, as I said, and suddenly middle classes were not being able to access the market. So this idea of for all is saying that public sector should also cover a part of middle classes segment. Also increase significantly the stock of housing with public support, and also public support is different from public housing. It's just creating all these middle systems with public and private, third sector. All this was implied in these new policies, and also favor the rental market and favor urban renewal. And in these policies, the rental market was presented with this distribution, meaning that it was divided in 3 areas: public, the public housing, let's say, or all other ways of subsidized rent for the lower income segment, the free market, and this middle segment was new in our system of public policies. This does not mean that these specific programs were all new. There was programs already targeting this public, but this idea that our segment, our rental market is divided in 3, and there is a middle segment which should have some kind of public support and was targeting middle classes, those middle classes that cannot afford to access the free market and should be supported. This was kind of new in the public discourse. So what I'm going to talk about is this program. So the name is here in Portugal, but is the Affordable Rental Program. And it was the first one to be implemented of all this proposed system. So the idea of the program was simple. So the goal was to promote this intermediary level by encouraging the landlords to lower their rents to this affordable level in exchange of tax benefits. And the idea was, if the rent is 20% below the median rent value for a certain area, and if the contract with the tenant is below this limit of 35% of effort rate, this means that the landlord can have exemption of property income taxes. At the time, property income taxes were a flat rate of 28%, so the idea was you do not pay 28%, you lower 20%. It seems reasonable, it will be okay. Probably we will have a good part, a good share of landlords going with it, and the idea was the goal was something around 20% of new contracts entering this segment. That was the goal that the policies were pointing at. 3 things I would... Oh, the relation between the house... Yes. Yes.
The indicator is the housing cost over volume.
Yeah, sorry.
So it's the relation between the rent and the income.
And the income. It's a direct translation.
So the person renting would have to share their income, like they would have to say how much is their
Yes.
income?
Yes.
Would that require the rental contract?
Yes. There is a platform where both the landlord and the tenant would have to put all their data, and each person has to apply, and then they will have a certificate to say, I can enter until this rent.
Okay, so you have to find a person that wants to rent your place, and then together you have to make the application to get them.
No,
Or how does
it's
it work?
separate applications. Landlords would register their flat within the system. And so a price will be determined for that based on any number of reasons, below market rent, etc. On the other hand, potential tenants would apply. This is my income, which means I can pay between 10 and 35%. So there will be a match, and so the government will make, the real landlord would associate the flats with potential tenants and then make the contract while paying a fair rent to the landlord.
But
Basically, it's a sublet.
Yeah,
It's basically the government renting and then subletting within this.
But you don't have to have the match done by the system. You have a certificate and you say, if you find a landlord that is in the program and has a rent that you can pay with your salary, you'll make the contract and then you'll say the system, I made the contract and you have the benefits.
sorry to be so specific, but of course we're working with all this.
No. I like
I
specificity.
have another question, because the German rental market, the tenants' laws are quite protective, but once you have a contract, it's very hard to get you out. But that means you have a fixed term contract, and after that you can be kicked out, is that right? And that's what
So let's, in that part I said I'm going just to go through the historical context was because of that. We had a fairly regulated system, and then it was in fact a transition, but with not much impact. And in 2012 we had a complete change, which means that you could make a contract with whatever rent you want by 1 year, and it's okay.
One day.
Or 1 day. No, first 1 year and then 1 day. Yeah. So it's completely free, and that's one of the reasons the rent just went skyrocket, because that happened at the same time as Airbnb and everything else. So.
Yeah, I was just wondering. Can you please use the street corner? I know I understand. Yeah, I was just wondering what happens if your income changes. So this is based on your income in relation to your the expenses of the flat or the rent of the flat.
It's, income and rent of the flat. Yes.
Yeah, but then if your income changes, so for instance, if you have a 5-year contract, doesn't matter. So it stays.
Eligible at the beginning of the contract,
Yeah.
and then
Yes.
it's a contract period.
Right. So if
we
you
are talking about 5 years contracts.
yeah, but I mean
Yes.
you can
Yes,
lose your
you
job
do.
after 6 months,
yes,
or
yes,
you
yes,
can
yes,
gain yeah. All right.
It's
Thanks.
basically a norm. After the process is gone, you have a regular rental contract with the state, which is subletting the flat. And yeah, you get a regular rental contract with the state that is subletting you the flat, and there are no protections in case anything changes. Those would be in other policies which do not exist, like policies for protecting.
Sorry, Simon. Here you don't have the sublet system. It's just a contract between the two, and the landlord has the exemption of the taxes.
Ah, okay, I'm confusing. Yeah,
That's
anyway.
another problem.
Anyway, there are regular rental contracts with no protections.
But that's it. You make a contract. If you really don't have a way to pay, you can stop the contract by yourself. That's the moment you make the contract, you have to meet those criteria, and in principle it's a 5 years contract, and if then you cannot, you just go away, but that's up to you.
Okay.
So, but there are also other 3 points I would like to make based on these small premises. So first, the affordable rent level is set in relation to the market and not to the income. So it's affordable, but it does not mean that people can afford. So just a name. Second thing is that by setting, that's what you're calling, by setting this limit of the 35%, we are not changing the rents. The rents are set by the 20% lower below the market. By setting the 35% limit, I'm saying that only a certain group that earns enough to meet those, to afford to pay those rents, are able to enter a publicly subsidized program. And in my view, this means that the government is saying that if I'm paying to that group up there, I have to find solutions to everyone below that limit. And the third thing is that the reference is this medium rent value for each place, which should be updated every 6 months. This means that the state, the government, has to compute these figures and share publicly the numbers finally of all the numbers of the values of the new rent contracts. So finally we could monitor the rental market. And so we did it. So this program interests us because of the program itself and because it brings the figures finally publicly, and it brings a certain number of criteria that everyone more or less knows, but how to calculate this effort rate, the law says now exactly how to do it, what numbers should you use it. The limit is 35%. Okay, it's a reference. Normally everyone talks about more or less 1/3. It's 35%. So we have the criteria established, and you have the figure established, so we can make a portrait based on some references of the rental market in a certain point. And so we made this study. First, making this portrait, and the idea was, for each area of the country, trying to understand a family in the median, it's not, we don't use the average, but yeah, the average family, let's say, with a medium salary, could it access the market at this point in this area or not? And if not, how many months of salary are they lacking? So we are asking this question. And the second question is, if the program were only starting, if this functions, if all the landlords enter this program, will that solve the problem of this middle income family? So these were the two main questions. And I put this here because this was made by a group, not by me. So it's me, Aitor Bareoro, Mariana Almeida, and Luisa Ribeiro that developed this study. And first, we developed for a newspaper because we thought that we needed to qualify the public debate. It was not an internal academic thing. So, some conclusions of the study. So, this is the market as it was, as I said, in 2019. It is not better now. All the reds and yellows is where this middle income family cannot afford a middle, let's say, house in that area. And you see how many months they are lacking. We arrived to 27 months in the end of the year. That if you could in that year work just 27 months more, you could buy, you could rent that house in your limit of 35% overburden. And we see that the problem, okay, is all this coastal area of the country, but mainly Porto, Lisbon, and Algarve. This is a really touristic area. Entering with the program, if we bring all the rents down 20%, let's say, what we see is that we could at the time more or less solve for the middle income family this area still Porto, Lisbon, Algarve would continue in that area, and mainly Porto and Lisbon would continue in a really bad shape. In Lisbon, we still have those black areas at more than 17 months lacking. So it would not solve the problem in the areas that are with the biggest problem. Another thing is trying to understand how the area of inaccessibility was growing. So this data is still with the program, if the program was being enforced and being implemented. We can see that those areas in the mainly Porto and Lisbon, what we see is that the area that is not accessible is growing month to month. So what's happening is people searching for houses in the center are going further and further and further, seeking for an affordable house, and the area is growing, and this means that also commuting times, commuting distances are growing at the same rate, at the same time this area is getting bigger. And finally, a third question was trying to understand what was the target, what was the public target of these policies. So what we have here is for each city one bar, for each bar all the population of that city, of that municipality, distributed by income levels. So for Coimbra, let's say, this is the 10% richer people in Coimbra, this is the 10% people with lower incomes, this is the median income. So people are distributed, and now we can see in the group of the population of each municipality, how can they react or access or not to this rental market. So this area here in the bottom end is the group that finds their solution in public housing. It's the public housing there is. This gray group here is the ones who can access private free market. And this red area is the area that of the people that can access or could access free market with the program. So that's the area that the program creates new of people that now can afford and could not afford before. So this means that in cities like Bragança or Castelo Branco, the program is targeting lower middle class, the 30% level of people, etc. But when we arrive, and it's more than 10% of the population, but when we arrive to the Porto and Lisbon, this publicly subsidized program is targeting the 20 or 30% richer group. Another point is this blank area. So that's why what I said when we are saying that we will only support those who can pay over the 30%, the 35% limit. We say, okay, so I'm responsible for all the rest. But there's a group, more than 50%, who cannot access a middle apartment at a middle rent in the place they're living. So there is a program to this group, there is a program to this group, and there is all those people who have no solution provided by the public sector. And so when we finally arrived at this point thinking, so the program was not that good because it was not meeting the needs of the tenants, then we found that the problem in fact was the other way around. It was not meeting the needs or the expectations of the landlords, so it had basically no one applying, it had basically no contract, so After 5 years, we had 1,000 contracts by this system, so it's 0.1% of the rental market, so it basically does not exist. It was just an exercise to trying to understand this program and trying to understand, based on those figures, our rental market. So it's that.
Thank you very much, Nuno. Please, Patricia, if you may.
Excellent. Can you hear me well in the back? I'll try and stay close to the mic, but I can't promise that I stay still for the whole presentation. I'm okay. I think we're fine. Thank you, Sonia. Okay, so thank you so much for this invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Patricia, and I'm here to talk to you about this paper that I've co-authored with Sonia about this municipal program. So now we're going to come down from the national level to the local level and discuss this program that has been going on since 2017, led by Lisbon municipality. What I want to argue is that the need for institutional capacity to deliver housing. So public-private partnerships could not be used as a solution for lack of institutional capacity. So many municipalities around the globe are faced with budget constraints, as we know, no news there. And many are trying to find these bridges, bridging the public and the private sector to try and sort of cover that hole they have now left. Now, they can't do it without institutional capacity. Let me expand a bit on what I mean by institutional capacity. So this presentation is not either for or against public-private partnerships for housing. It's not a normative stance. It's like marriages. There's good ones and bad ones. That's where I stand, at least. Yeah, let's leave alone the issue of if PPPs are good or bad. Let's try and understand how they work, why different stakeholders want to mobilize PPPs, and where we are at with this program in Lisbon. Okay, so following from Nuno's presentation, there's no news here in the sense that Lisbon is in real pear shape when it comes to housing affordability. We're making to the top of many rankings globally. There's a real dire situation going on, and it's particularly an intergenerational issue because the lucky ones, some of us in the room that managed to buy property before really the 2012s, that decade, we are sort of okay, sort of struggling with interest rates rises, but we're on the property ladder, as the English like to call it. But the ones who didn't are now real in dire straits because of property prices, both to buy or to rent, particularly, as Nuno stressed, in city centers, the big cities of the country. So there's a real need in this continuum of housing. And here I'm drawing on Christine Whitehead and Monk, 2020, no, sorry, it's an old paper, where 2010 paper, but still, pretty relevant, that discusses the spectrum of housing in a more complex way than just public or just private or public subsidized or social housing. What we're going to focus here today is on this notion of affordable housing, affordable rental, which we know, it's highly contested, depends on how we measure it. What do we mean when we say affordable? In this particular case, the municipality chose to consider affordable based on the income of the families, 20% below the average income. So this time round, for this particular program, which, by the way, has a similar name to the other one, creates a bit of a confusion, but this one is called Programa Renda Acessível, PRA, PRA, as we refer to it. So this program has a complicated, sort of elaborated way of calculating affordable rent. But let's park that on a side for a second, and let's explore how this public-private partnership works. If you look at this Brata paper from 2020, what she does is, and I'm going to move here closer to the screen just to point out to the key so that you can then read this, the image. A white square or rectangle means discussions ongoing, and then if you have a bit of the square filled in is the projects are in procurement stage, and then you go through all the stages until the rectangle is fully filled, which means the PPPs are already working. So what you can see here is a number of different sectors: airports, housing, schools, health, and sports, and a number of different countries where PPPs are being used. So in terms of housing, you can see that in Portugal it's being considered at this stage, you're being considered, here we are, but in the UK they are fully working. With this note, I just want to emphasize that in the UK they are fully working, but mostly for urban regeneration projects, so not projects running from scratch, okay? And this program, PRA, is a program on municipal lands. Let me tell you more about that. We had a question in the back. Do you still want to ask?
I was just understanding, like, public-private partnership, but how do you specify that? Because in the case of airports, for example, the private partner would develop the airport and would rent it back to whoever it is. So I don't know, is that the same thing? How do you understand the public-private partnership in housing? Like the investment is made by the private investor and it's then rented back to the state, or how does that work?
Would you mind waiting a second just to get to that slide? Is that okay? Yeah, no, it's a very important point, definitions, but let me tell you the story and then we'll get there in a second. So let me just explore a bit the rationales for entering PPPs. This is, what the literature is, PPPs are not new. Some call it, old wine in new bottles, how the expression goes. But what we have here is the public sector with lack of funding or limits to its borrowing capacity. You have this narrative of the private sector expertise, which might be very well true, but might also be a sort of contextual situation where the public sector lost that expertise, and this idea of value for money. On the side of the private sector, there's a real growing interest of investing in affordable housing or spectrums of affordable housing. There's no significant alternative investments for the private sector to a certain extent. There's this idea of portfolio diversification of risk. There's ideas around, well, there is demand, and there's emerging, in the last decade already, idea of engagement in social impact. It's the alphabet soup of doing well while doing good: corporate social responsibility, responsible investment, ESGs, you name it. And the particular risk-return profile, which we can expand because this was part of our exploration. So what we did to try and study this program was we looked at both the public sector and the private sector involved in this program. And the way the program works is the public sector provides municipal land, some land with buildings, most land with no buildings, and asks the private sector to build X number of units, from which about 80% will be affordable housing, affordable units, and 20% initially were to be free market, and they were to be transferred to the private sector for the sake of viability of the financial model behind this. Meanwhile, this changed, but let me hold to that idea and let me go back to that in a second. So the traditional conception we get from the 14 interviews we've done between 2021 and 22 was that this idea that the public sector is the holder and the protector of the public interest, the sole protector of this idea of the public interests, which we then found that it's more contested than you could imagine to start off with, and that they have mostly a long-term interest, which we're going to challenge as well. We also challenge this idea of the private sector solely interested in private benefits, even though we're not saying that they're not interested in private benefits. They are a private venture, therefore that's their mission. But there's this emergence of CRS, ESGs, which can or cannot be monetized So let's discuss that in a second as well. And we also want to unpack this idea of the private sector as short-term interests. We know today cities are after long-term investors. So there's this sort of imagination that there's a type of investor out there which is the right one for cities, which is the institutional investor that has a really long-term interests and accepts this more beneficial for cities risk profile. Low yields is the lingo of the property industry. So low returns, but safe and stable, that match the liabilities of these investors, long-term investors that have liabilities such as paying pension funds, insurances, etc. So we challenge this idea that we can solve the city's problems through identifying institutional investors by saying this is an ecosystem. We actually need the short-term developer that comes in, develops the buildings, and then leaves. So how do we attract this diversity of players, and how do we square this circle of providing the public good while we provide the private benefit? If you look into the literature in academia, it's actually quite frustrating because in the sense that the negative reputation of the private sector is everywhere. So you don't seem to be able to work with private sector. You know, they are irremediably self-serving, aggressive management strategies, PPPs for affordable housing, damaging for the private sector. This is what you find, and you know, it might very well be true. Even though there's accounts of less irreconcilable perspectives, and some examples on the board highlight legacy landlords, so landlords that have a really long interest in the particular site, they care about their reputation, their family has been involved in this particular geography. So there might be more to it than pure profit seeking. Again, not excluding that profit seeking is part of their interests, except if we're talking about, you know, what's the name? Can't recall now, neither English or Portuguese. Not for profit is a good one. There was some other name, but it will come to my mind in a second. Charity, that sort of, yeah. Housing associations, yeah, those sort of players that we know that have other than purely profit-seeking motivations. I can't still, what's the name of when Italy and the artists were financed by? Mecenas, and but thank you. But there's another name that I'm after. But that's what I, you know. But you don't find many of those around, developers that are mecenas of. But there are a few, niche market. Anyway, place stewards. I did a bit of work on this. These are extremely long-term land owners in London, for instance, where they do have a interest in making the place better. They are there for the extreme long-term. Some of them are there for longer than municipalities have been, which is interesting, kind of spins this idea of the municipalities being the responsible for the long term and the developers being there only for the short term. So we're trying to unsettle these ideas and explore a bit more the complexity of this ecosystem. So in a nutshell, GSOP really puts it down as in PPP's dilemma is that they need to cater for both the public interest and the private benefit. That's what they need to do if they are to work. Easier said than done. So now let me tell you a bit more about the program that we explored. So the way we defined it is this is a cross-subsidized model on municipal lands, quite important, so we need the land to start off this conversation. It was launched in 2017 by a left-wing coalition government. Coalition is important as well. Let me explain why in a second. Initially, there were 9 sites identified, which together would be able to provide 5,000 homes. There was a lot of debate about, is this a concession? Is this a public-private partnership? Well, it was a bit of a drama that delayed the whole process quite significantly. If you look abroad and if you try to understand, you can see easily that there's a lot of contestation around the term. Not even at the European level, people seem to agree on what is a public-private partnership, because it's a particular type of contract that involves risk sharing. But why is it not a concession? Well, it's beyond my payroll because it's really legal language. What I can tell you is that no one really knew, neither in Portugal, and it went through courts to try and decide. And in the end, it was decided that rather than a concession, it was a private partnership, which comes with a number of additional requirements in terms of finding comparators, why is this better than direct public provision, etc. So this program was advertised at major international real estate conferences, MIPIN and others, to try and identify and attract this institutional investor. So the investor with a really long-term interests that would be happy to put their money, tie their money to their project and extract a 3% yield, annual yield, to match their liabilities. Well, what we found was really interesting. On the one hand, these institutional investors wanted to buy it all in one go. Like, oh, can we buy the 9 schemes all together? And the municipality's like, no, you can buy one at a time. And they were like, well, that's a bit small for us. So we're not going to get into the trouble of this literacy of understanding this contract, getting into the contract with you for 100 units or 500 units. Either we want the 5,000 or nothing. Really interesting finding, problems of scale to match this investor. Second really interesting finding is to do with this tension between the concession and PPP and how important it is to get it right from the start, because there were disagreements both at the national level between the municipality and the Court of Auditors that stalled the process for more than a year. And then really interesting third finding is this idea of the public interest in how the coalition partners disagreed on what that meant in terms of the design of the program. Let me be a bit more specific. So the program initially was meant to transfer 20% of the property to the private sector. That was how the model worked. Now, one of the left-wing partners of the coalition drew a red line, ideological red line, saying we're not giving away public land. Fair enough, but by not giving public land, it meant that the contract, rather than being a PPP or concession, 30 years long concession, after which it would come back to the public sector, it would have to be extended to a 99-year period. Okay? What this meant from the investors we interviewed was like, actually, they were like, great, this is 90 years old, in our discount cash flows means a permanent, this is our assets entirely now. So really interesting tension between what is the private, what is the public good, how do we protect it? Do we protect it by drawing a red line and saying nothing goes to the private sector ever, but we extend the contracts to the point that no one at the municipality, because then we ask the municipality, who's going to be here after 99 years to make sure that the property comes back? They were like, well, we hope someone will. So really interesting tension here. And so, you know, conclusions, pragmatic conclusions. There's this idea of institutional capacity, which we need the municipalities to be able to act as principals, as in, okay, they've designed a particular model in a particular way. They need to make sure they talk to the stakeholders beforehand and that they don't want to be challenged at a later stage saying, well, it's not a concession, it's a PPP. And you can't transfer 20%, you need to not transfer anything and extend the link. So we need to talk. The municipalities, the private partners, and the other organizations, such as the courts, need to talk beforehand. Then there's, and align what they mean by public interests, for the reasons I've explained. And then there's also a point on what is the private benefit. But And here, yeah, what we want to emphasize is this idea of the oversimplified views of the institutional investor, because in the end, what happened was that they could only find smaller developers in the Portuguese landscape. And these developers didn't have the money required to start to initiate the construction on site. So they had to go to banks. When they got to the bank didn't know the model, and there was no land for them to give them as a, if everything goes pear-shaped, you take the land, because the land is municipal. And so the banks were quite uneasy with this process entirely. So, where are we at the moment? There were a number of competitions opened, but there's only one scheme going on. We truly hope that the schemes go further, and complete, because obviously there's a lot of money, resources, municipal land, the hours behind, the staff working on this, the traveling to MIPIN, etc. There's a lot of resources put into this program. So we truly hope that it goes forward and works. But I think there are lessons that other places can learn from the problems we've seen here. So to complete, 2 points, one on the case and one a bit more broad. So despite significant resources allocated to the program, including municipal land and human resources, there is still a weak institutional framework pinning this case and other cases that link the private sector to affordable housing provision. And then finally, in a sort of a more theoretical point, we want to keep challenging this idea of this traditional divide between public and private, long-term, short-term, private interests, public benefit, because really we think it's not particularly useful. And if we are to spend time developing partnerships, we need to break these barriers and these traditional ways of thinking about things which actually do not correspond to the way the environments, the ecosystems work. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Patricia. And so now I'm sure that Simon has a lot to say about what Nuno and Patricia brought to us, and that can be mixed with questions and answers. So Simon, it's up to you now.
I promise I'll try to be short and actually do something I wasn't thinking about doing at the beginning of this. Like in Sonia's introduction, okay, what I was thinking about doing, I was thinking about demolishing the concept of housing affordability, because it is my contention that the problem is affordability. Historically, analytically, how the concept of affordability, in my interpretation, was created as a way to politically justify the end of the effort to provide for universal housing welfare. But this is an endeavor that, I mean, we can discuss if you prefer, but in a sense, then making this discussion on the face of these programs will be quite absurd in the sense that somehow, when Sonia said, we're thinking about trying to understand the success of those programs. And then what we presented are two programs that, I mean, we can even talk about evaluating success. The affordable housing program never started up, basically, so it's not even failed. It's not existing. It's residual. Pretty much the same with the program presented by Patricia. And so at a certain point, I'm saying, are we just going about bashing Portuguese lawmakers? I mean, let us bash Portuguese lawmakers. It's what I've been doing for the last 8 years, basically, speaking while working and doing research and activism on housing, because I think Portuguese lawmakers, I mean, it's not that they have no idea what they're doing, it's that what they're doing is not working for universal housing. They have other goals, in my opinion. It's economic growth, it's capital accumulation, if you want. And that's why this program failed, if we want. But there is maybe a more interesting point to make in a context in which people are not even understanding what's going on here, like you, like asking, what's a tenure? What's about rental tenure? What does it mean that a tenant can be kicked out after 1 day during a period of time, which the minimum duration of a rental contract was 1 day? Now it's 3 years, but in fact it's 1 year. The minimum, so it's 3 years, the regular minimum duration, but you can make it for 1 year, and it's 1 year period, while in Germany you have like this idea of ownership of the tenancy. That is, that if you're a tenant, you own the right to stay in the house indefinitely, which we had up until the 90s. Now, technically, you could make a rental contract for indeterminate duration, but nobody do that. Because, of course, it's more interesting kicking you out after 1 year or renegotiating the rent every second year. And, I mean, one can even get completely lost from all these details. I did get lost, and I made a mistake when discussing about Nuno's program, but not because I was making anything up, because I was thinking he was presenting another program which exists, which is almost the same, but which works with this matching on the program rather than on the market. And the point is, if you list, you listed the reforms, but if you list the number of programs that have been created since Portugal started to work on housing again in 2017, you get lost. It's a dozens of different programs, and here we are, things are even worse than they were in 2019 nonetheless. And so one can make mistake. The point is that we have this ton of programs which are honestly absurd, grotesque to some extent. When you have an affordable rental program which is targeting 20% richest households in the municipality, say, oh, what are we doing here? We're lowering the rent to the wealthy. They're not wealthy, they're earning 30,000 euros a year, but for Lisbon, it's the wealthy. I would suggest here that these things are not just that Portugal as crazy or incompetent or criminal policymakers, but that there is something which is paradigmatic of the problem with affordability more broadly. Nuno was saying this new generation of housing policies was aiming fundamentally at expanding the intervention for all, right? And this is in the text. There was this vacuum between people in the market and people receiving social housing, 2%, 3%, depending on how you calculate, and nothing else. It's not true because, in fact, as Nuno showed, most of the investment in housing that has been made in this country was to subsidize ownership. So you could say middle class have been subsidized. In fact, banks have been subsidized because those programs were mostly captured by increase in prices. Nonetheless, there were, at least on a superficial level, programs for the middle class, and it's most of the investment. Nonetheless, in 2016, 2017, the socialist government will say, we need to target the middle classes. The point is, I'm all for targeting middle classes if you have a universal housing welfare to begin with. When the solution gap, as Nuno was showing, is basically half the population, and basically almost everyone, apart the 2% that are lucky enough to have very bad quality social housing, or lucky enough to be in the top 10% of the rental distribution, is basically everyone. Why? Because we're missing what is necessary to build a housing welfare. As you know better than me, as housing policy scholars, it's enough social housing for it to become a choice for larger parts of the population and not just for the destitute or the poorest, and strong enough market regulation achieved either by means of rent control or by means of creating power for tenants to negotiate, Swedish system, for instance, or by giving strong protection so the individual tenant is strong enough to defend their right in the courts because they have this ownership and what it is. When you don't have those, you see affordability in and of itself. And it seems to me that affordability in and of itself, once again, doesn't do much, especially if you don't have a lot of money. But if you want to actually match the difference between these hyperinflated prices and the prices people can pay, you should spend really a lot, unless you start building and renting yourself. But that would be social housing, public housing, right? But so far, so good in the sense of I see here a problem with affordability in general. You're asking me why? We have affordable programs in other countries which work, and that's the point. It would be easy to look at this program and say, oh, Portugal, I don't know what to do. And that's basically what comparative housing studies have been doing historically, right? Comparing systems on a face level and saying, this is more advanced, this is less advanced. Portugal, why aren't you a bit more like Germany or the Netherlands? What housing studies have historically forgotten to do is history first and urban development second. I'm talking about the urban development in general. The process of European integration was based on the peripheralization of some countries, especially thanks to creating a currency which favored export of the center and pushed the peripheries to bet on low added value sectors like construction, real estate, and tourism. So it's the very process of European integration which start to explain those things. But there's more than that. There is the explicit role of the European Union, which despite never having been endowed with competence on housing, has shaped housing policy at the European level in many dimensions. First, with austerity. Austerity is not a thing of the past, of after 2007. It's at the very least since the 90s that the process of European integration was pushing austerity, especially in peripheral countries, who was the first to be killed, housing investment. The little investment that countries like Portugal, Italy, Spain have done in urban development was entirely channeled to matching European structural funds, which did not allow to make housing, if you remember. Now they do, after 30 years, or 30 years too late. But there's more than that. The process of integration of mortgage markets has created, in countries like Italy and Spain, very deregulated mortgage markets, which were not existing before, and so on and so forth. In fact, on the one hand, we could say that would not be universal housing welfare in Germany and the Netherlands and Denmark and the Netherlands without underdevelopment of welfare systems in the periphery of the continent. And more specifically, it was the European thinking about housing that started promoting affordability rather than public housing, massive investment in public housing. So in this sense, I think that the example, the grotesque example of affordability in Portugal shows problems which are problems of affordable housing in and of itself. You should never think about affordable housing before you build a universal welfare, which means 20%, 10%, whatever you want to aim at, social housing in the strict sense, and a strongly regulated rental market. And I mean, but the European Union has really been pushing affordability in the way that's been promoting cutting investment in social housing and then doing whatever it takes, public-private partnerships in a strict or large sense. And so this is what I wanted to do, not just arguing that the problem may be affordability, but that the problem is specifically affordability in an integrated market which was designed in a way that willingly or not amplified inequalities, like the European Union and, in fact, the European continent more broadly. And that was the provocation I wanted to bring to the fore. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Simon. So, time for questions from the audience or from the speakers. Who would like to start? We have the mics somewhere. Sonia has one, Marco has the other one.
I perhaps could break the ice, or I just
Else, if you may.
Thank you. It was really, really interesting to listen to this. And I'm still gathering my thoughts. But so perhaps just the first question on Nunu's presentation. So at the very end you said it didn't work, but I didn't really understand why that was. And so like if you could give us some details. And then a very specific question on the 20% below median rent. At what scale is that calculated?
Okay. So starting by the last one. So that there is a basic figure which is a number which is the median value of the rent of the last 12 months per square meter of each area. Each area is a problematic thing. This means that it enters a statistical, technical decision, meaning that you have to have enough contracts to make it statistically valid. So in Lisbon and Porto metropolitan areas, this is at the scale of the parish, so it makes some sense. It's really more or less the value of the rents on that area. Even if we talk to people of the area, they say median does not work in this sector because we don't have anything in the middle. We have two peaks, but that's another thing. The problem is when you have less contracts, they say I cannot make a statistic valid analysis at the scale of the parish, so I make it at the scale of the municipality. This means that you can have a municipality in the center of the municipality. For instance, you have I don't know, €7 per square meter of median rent, and in the far rural area inside the same municipality, probably there the normal rent would be 3, but if you make 4 in that area, you are gaining the subsidies, and on the other side, if you are in the middle of the center of the main city of the municipality, the gap is too big. So it's because it's not 20% below the prices of that area is 20% below the prices of the average of the municipality is too low for that area. And that's one of the problems of the program in itself, is this kind of technicalities. But to specify how you have the price, let's say, you have this value, it's a basic value, the median of the square meter, and then you have a fairly complex algorithm. It's not complex, it's just a lot of things. It is an apartment or a house, it has external exterior spaces or not, it has, yes, of course, number of rooms, the area, it has furniture or it has not furniture, it has kitchen or it has not kitchen. So it has an algorithm, and all those things count, and you put the value of the median rent for that area in that algorithm, and you put all the characteristics of your specific apartment, and that gives you a price. And it's that price you have to meet as a landowner, and then so you have to put your rent there to apply to the program. Why are people not applying? I was going to say no one studied it, but yes, they studied it because the government asked a company to study, but the study is not out, it's not public, so no one really knows. From the comments, what we have heard about, I've not conducted a specific study on it. So there are several small things. The insurance system connected with the program is strange because first it was mandatory to have an insurance, but you could not get it. Then the government managed to have one or two companies that made the insurance, but the money they would pay if something went wrong was just to rents. Then all the bureaucracy, those things we were talking about, you have to have all the values, you have to meet someone, you have to put things on the platform, is fairly complex, but those things of the numbers, it works in some places, it does not work on others. But at the end, it seems that we could put it in 2 points. First is the expectation of the landowners, mainly in the areas where the program would have to work, in Lisbon, Porto. Even if you are not in a really high-end rental market, or if you are not in the tourism sector, or even if you are not there, you always have the expectation that this is going fast enough, this is going really high. You think that if I enter some kind of this program, I may be stuck there and I'm completely losing the train. Even if I'm not, I know landlords that have their apartments below that limit and they do not apply. They say, I won't put there my apartment. Why? I don't trust it. And even if they go and I say, but there's no problem, you can, it's a public thing, I put my apartment, it's important to say that Portugal had the rents freezed for too long, completely freezed. So there is always this panic. I put my thing in a public system and I do not know what's happening next. And in fact, for instance, it happened immediately after it happened a thing that it's a bit, it seems everything is all right, but if you think it was that immediately after this program started to run, 2 years later or something like that, the rents went really high, and the government said maximum 2% rise this year to all rents. And we said, to all rents? Why to all rents? The ones who are really low and the ones who are really high, everyone's. So, and the landlord that this year decided to bring them 20% lower to meet the tax benefits, etc. And then you say, now you cannot rise them at the inflation rate as you are expected to. So all these small things basically make a big mistrust, and this idea, and also what Simone was saying, that is not how the program works, but many people start thinking that it would be the government that would decide who was going to live in your apartment. So there is a big mistrust of landlords relating the public sector, and they will not just enter a program even if it is apparently good for them. So basically mistrust, the expectation of a really fast growth of the price and small technicalities.
Can I add a point to that? The more like political economic lens. I mean, this discourse about Portuguese landlords not trusting the government and the state, I think that's a good rhetorical argument for not admitting. It's about liquidity. And that's, in many cases, the reason why people, here we have this thing that you can basically, now it's harder, but for a long time it was easy to move from rental to touristic facility, short-term rental, without doing anything. Now they're frozen, the new, but this idea that basically renting means having your asset frozen for some time. In the short and medium term, you can sell it whenever you want. So it's not just that you earn more and you can follow up on the increase of rent, but also that you can sell it at any point in time. That's important. When you liberate yourself from the ownership of the tenant, you have liquid asset and not just fixed asset.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to this concept of affordability that you mentioned.
Let me just
Yes.
say something very shortly. You have a question also, Joanna and Felipe, so if you can join your questions, and then we will answer to
Yeah,
everything.
yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
So, thank you.
Okay, so I think we should be careful to not like say affordability doesn't matter, because I think what your case has somehow proven that it was very useful that you finally got the data, you know, and you finally at least have a measure to say the system isn't working. Because before that, you know, all sorts of things could have been invented, like how the provision of housing would work and how whatever. So now at least you can show these numbers and say, look, what you're doing is not working. So in that sense, I think affordability makes sense to prove that, of course, there need to be different policies somehow. And then affordability as a concept, in the sense that, okay, we just need to have a few screws here and there, and then we'll create a functioning market. That does not work. I totally agree with you, Simone, that that's not what it's about. Like, and of course, we should realize that housing does not function as a market with supply and demand. That's just, it's not working. It's also not working in the center. You know, it's not working in the peripheries to like a very dramatic extent. But we look at Germany, where we have strong tenants' rights, and we've had public housing subsidies for a very long time, and in our central cities, but also in smaller cities. Like, I come from a smaller city, which happens to be a university city, where people want to go to. Our market is not working. So I think it is not like people cannot afford. You know, like, and we have larger problems to make that argument, because we don't have the data to measure affordability. Like, we don't have the local income data, so we can't even say, look, this is not working. So, you know, in that sense, you're even more advanced than we are. So I think, you know, it's definitely a matter of sort of making larger arguments even than the center-periphery argument, saying, okay, how can we take housing out of the market? Because obviously our market cannot provide it. And that's not saying we cannot work with public-private partnership, because of course we can make sweeping statements, this is all not working, but that doesn't give us a solution. I mean, apart from having some kind of revolution and expropriating all the landowners or something, you know, which is fine. But how, you know, how do we work with this? Like, what do we do? Of course, we need to strengthen tenants' rights, but it's very hard to do this to the point where we actually cap rents and reach that kind of affordability, which I think we still need as a concept. Like in Germany, we always see ways around that. Like, for instance, we now have a law, if you want to move into your own flat as a landlord, you can kick your tenant out, and that's being abused to a massive extent now. So our tenants' laws are not really working anymore. So I think what you said is interesting. Like, who are we working with, and is it really this dichotomy between the public interest? What did you say? The public interest and the private benefit. Like, what is the private benefit? Can it be the benefit of the tenants? Like, how, you know, how we're working with some sort of housing actors that would be tenants as well, you know, like where actually the private interest is the same as the tenant's interest, because they have a larger share in making decisions of this private actor, you know, and that means how can we, of course, you need investments in housing to be made, of course. You know, you need more housing units, you need housing refurbished. Like, where do these investments come from? How can we mobilize these kind of investments, and how can we put the tenants on the map? So what we've been trying to do is, like, if you do give out public land, what are the criteria? Like, who are we giving this out to? What are these kind of housing actors? You know, for example, that's one thing to look out for. So, okay, that's been many issues raised. I think it's a big subject, but so yeah, I think that's what I'm more interested in. Okay, now we've made the diagnosis. What are the actual solutions? That's what we're here for, to look at the municipal level, but of course looking at lawmakers higher up as well, to, you know, what should we actually be lobbying for, you know? So.
Okay, let's collect. How long do we have? Just till 12:30.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's not a question, it's more of a comment. So regarding what Nunu was saying about why maybe the landlords are not using this, we also, in our cooperative, we provide the normal architecture service, and we have this agenda, of course, for housing that is very strong. And we, every time a new client comes in that wants to do touristic apartments, we present them the alternative for affordable housing, for example, and all the benefits. And in 30 seconds, they all say, but we are a business, so this tax benefit does not apply, because so it only applies if the landlord is actually an individual person. If it's a collective person, he can deduct all the expenses, and then tax is calculated in a different way. So yeah, he will never benefit from that. So this already excludes a big portion of landlords.
And to add to that, that's what I was saying, there is lots of, for instance, overlapping of benefits. For instance, Porto and Lisbon are urban regenerating areas where the tax is a flat rate of 5%. So it just does not. I'm saying I'm exempting you of the tax, and they say, but I'm working there. If I'm a private company, I don't pay that tax, and if I'm working in Porto or Lisbon, I don't pay that tax. So there is a lot of and now the tax is 15% or lower, so it just does not work because things are.
There is no actual benefit in the end, so very hard to get. And regarding what Patricia said, we as a cooperative are also trying to do this kind of arrangement and have access to municipal land, also to promote housing solutions that can fit in both affordable rent or controlled cost construction. And we've been discussing this with many other countries, because this is a model that already is implemented in Tübingen. Many countries have this, and actually what makes it possible is always the access to the credit. And some countries have it sorted. In Germany, for example, was the normal bank, but somehow they understood the system. In Catalonia, it was they call it national bank, but it's actually from Catalonia region only, but it's a public bank. And we here in Portugal, we should have Banco do Fomento, but Banco do Fomento, they don't meet with people, real people. They only contact the normal banks for them to then propose some credit products. But then we go to the same place. Even if there are subsidized credits that come directly from the European institutions and banks that are specifically made for this kind of housing solutions, if the banking system does not understand them, they will always ask for the same kind of guarantees that they ask for normal market. And this is what is happening in Portugal for the moment. And I can tell you that we try to organize ourselves in a network. Even though it's still informal, we got our meeting proposed directly by the Housing Ministry to Banco do Fomento, and they canceled 30 minutes before the meeting. So we've been 2 months trying to have this meeting, and so this is very, very important actor that needs to understand what we are talking about, and they have no idea. Yeah.
May you pass
Yeah.
your mic to Joana, please, Filipe? Thank you.
One
Sonia
comment.
just told me that we can go a little bit further after 12:30. You don't need to rush.
Yeah, one thing Philip already said, and the other was more like a curiosity because I think none of you spoke about one factor that for me was also, I didn't do any study or something, but for the affordable renting program, for the private owners, I also thought that there was a big impact of not going for this program because there's a lot of black market, and so exemption of taxes, it's not. But I wouldn't know if there is really a big impact on this or not.
And be very specific about, you know, a few things that I feel I know. So the first one is this idea of the diversity of players and stakeholders and a common understanding. You know, the moment, if you think of this as a value chain, the moment particular players don't know the rules of the game or the game has changed and the rules are not apparent, the whole system collapses. You know, and it can collapse at banks, as Flipa, isn't it? Flipa was saying, because banks don't understand the model. So that was one issue that we've identified here. So I think there's a lot of tweaks that can be made to these policies to make them work. We need to work with something. We know that, you know, it's not a Portuguese specific or European specific problem. This is a global problem with different shapes, but it's a global problem, both global north and global south, let alone global south, which is well, in itself a completely different ballgame. But it is a global problem. America, Canada, Netherlands, you know, we've heard about all these different geographies. So we could talk about financialization, and we have found ways to explain part of why this isn't working. But let me try and focus on what I think could help different policies around the globe to work. And one is continuity. I think if we keep changing the policies and the rules of the game, there's no time for the stakeholders to get literacy. Because, you know, I have an anecdotal story on the policy you spoke about. It takes time to understand how it works and to go through the process. And, you know, this family member of mine that went through, you know, he's not a speculator investor. He really just wants that property to be rented on the long term with some. So it would be a perfect match for this particular person I have in mind, anecdotal evidence, as I'm, you know, highlighting. The problem was with the insurance to start off with. Eventually, they've overcome all the burdens, and they are now one of the 1,000 people in the country that managed. So perhaps if there's continuity, there's hope, now that the insurance companies know the drill, have gone through the process. Now, there is a significant sort of illegal market of rental. I don't know if we know a figure in Portugal. It is significant. But I think these are slightly different problems in the sense of really mobilizing different types of stakeholders and not calling, because there's the name private in there, say that it's bad. Because we always need the private sector, even and a very strong public sector. Don't get me wrong. I hope that point came across clearly. It's not because there's alternative models or parallel models. We need an even stronger public sector that knows the language of financial viability. You know, is it a PPP? Is it a concession? Why not? We need very strong public sector to be able to deliver through this ever more complicated mechanisms. And I will leave it there. I hope I've addressed some of the points.
Thank you, Patricia. Yeah. Simone, would you like to add something?
Definitely. Well,
Maybe you can start and then Nuno can finish to change the order.
I mean, of course, my argument on affordability was very brief, and so I couldn't go in that. But one of the issues you basically raised implicitly is affordability an analytical or a normative concept? Nobody knows. And that's one of the problems. As an analytical problem, as a measure, it's absolutely problematic. It doesn't work. And we all know, you know, a classical burden rate, the effort rate says something about some specific parts of the population, what once upon a time was called middle classes, but nothing about those at the bottom and the top of the income distribution. And anyway, even when we have data to showing, look, the affordable rental program is not working, like they did greatly in a reportage which was a blast, nothing happened. But okay, that's the analytical side. In normative terms, that's where I think the problem with affordability is a fundamentally normative concept, which is somehow purported as an analytical one. And my understanding of the normative dimension is precisely a cover-up for the end of the age of universal welfare. But at any rate, I'm not saying don't use affordability. I think affordability works for a specific, at the bottom of the entrance to the market. And so, but when do you start prioritizing that? When you finish resolving issues with poverty to begin with, for instance. So let us start building public housing and then put money into affordability. In the meanwhile, I think we can do things for affordability, but which is changing the framework, the fiscal framework, done better than that, but also the financial framework. How do we shift housing investment from speculative financial instruments to non-speculative, which did exist? German Bausparkasse, which are a very good way to fund affordable housing, not for the poor, but for the lower to middle classes. The Italian GESCA, it was a revolving fund created by the contribution by employer, or revolving funds of several. There are ways, but those are ways which work in specific dimensions. I mean, when I'm saying these things, it's pretty much based on a very pragmatical attempt with an European Bauhaus. I was contracted as an expert to write down the affordability dimension of the evaluation of programs of the next generation of the European Bauhaus. And it was very hard, not to say impossible, to write down a way for project makers to understand whether the project was affordable, considering that in Denmark it's very easy to do affordable housing. In Portugal it's almost impossible doing the same thing. And so, as I was insisting with my boss, Thomas Malutas, Thomas, we need to change national policies. It's not our job. Yes, okay, so we're not doing affordability. Of course, we found ways to create evaluation which are context sensitive, but still we perfectly know that the problem of affordability is never at the project level, it's always at the policy level. And I mean, so in this sense, when we say, so what we should do in practical terms, I think first, in the present conjuncture, everything we do at the state level should be oriented to creating decommodified housing. Never to support markets, which don't need our support, but to expand the amount of housing which is outside of the market control, either by funding houses that remains decommodified, community land trusts, cooperatives, you name it, there are hundreds of public housing, or by extracting private owned housing from the private market determination of prices, rent control. And you say, how we do it? Well, when we were writing the project, when they were writing the project, Sonia was asking me contribution. I say, Sonia, we need to stop looking at how to make policies. We know how to make policies. The problem is not what policies work. The point is, how do we get those policies? What is the political needs for making the policy that we do know work to be feasible in the present context? And I think in the present context, the only solution that is at stake is at the European level. Only at the European level we can manage to have actual rent control and actual investment in public housing nowadays. Otherwise, we will get some countries to defend, if not even improve marginally their welfare, Germany, the Netherlands, the Denmark, Finland, and so on and so forth, and the others to remain stuck with programs like those that Nuno and Patricia have presented. It's a political problem much more than a policy one, in my opinion. And that's not, the idealistic guy. It's actually the practical guy. I think that just looking at the policies, they're not solving any problem. practically speaking.
Thank you very much, Simon. Nuno, please.
So just yes, just comments. So I cannot. After that, I cannot make a comprehensive speech. Just some comments. First, some things I just popped when you are talking about this wider, bigger framework of the policies. I just want to add two small points to probably even the first intervention you've made. One is considering the specific Portuguese case. It's important to remember, as I was talking about, that in the policies and our tradition and the mindset of both the population, the politician landscape, let's say, for too many years the idea was public spending on housing would be specifically social housing for that tiny area, and then supporting the market that's up almost to 80%. And and it's important to acknowledge that for too many years in Portugal, mainly after '86, these policies that in a whole amounted to less than 1% of our GDP, and 80% of that was to boost the private market, was not seen, or was not directed by housing needs. This is not a way to read it. This is what's in the law. It is, these programs were created as a macroeconomic system to support the economic system. The idea was really simple. We are entering the European Union, the EEC at the time. Wages, the salaries are expected to go high, and we are losing our borders. So we have to keep the money of the households here. We cannot start importing goods. What's the only good that does not move? Houses. So we had policies for people buying their first house, for people buying their second house. We had a program of savings that people could save only for houses, that arrived to the point where there was a monthly competition with a person in the TV that would take out a number and say, oh, the saving account number 3, 4, 5, 7, 7, this just gains a double of the amount. The interests of the account for the housing were higher than the interests of the credit. So you just kept having a credit and having a savings. It was better than paying your credit. And so we arrived at the point in which we are one of the countries in the world with more houses per family and things like that. So just saying, this is not a way of looking at things. For too many years, housing was, at least in Portugal, and not only, of course, policy of the economy sector, not of the housing sector. And this changes things. Another thing is policies answer to the expectations of the population. We have 75% of homeowners. No government will push a policy that has as a result pushing the prices down. That's taking money out of the pockets of the majority of the people. So we can talk about rent control, market control until a certain point, but the government will never make a policy that will destroy the value of the land. That's if it was the other way around, if the majority of the people were tenants, probably they could, they cannot. What happened here is that all these policies were being enforced since 2017, namely when the foreign, the special rapporteur of the national UNO and stuff like that came here and start making reports of the problems. Yes, they created these policies, but they are not central at the government. They became central when the interest rates started rising, because that's impacting the people who are buying houses and are buying through credit. That's the point where the policy really changed. While we were talking about rental markets, well, some policies were made, but without really changing the things. So, what I'm saying is there are some basic things that make it difficult, exactly what Simon was saying. So, discussing the rental market, of course, is a problem, but it's a problem that, at least in Portugal, is a problem of a small minority, and will always be seen as that. And housing sector has lots of other, it plays in other sectors and in other problems, and those expectations and systems are, I would say, I was going to say more powerful, but it's not only that. They are they impact more in the economic system and in all the system than the tenants, for instance. So they are more powerful, not only because of their importance of lobbying capacity. They are really more powerful. Another thing is, and it's interesting, Thatcher would say that popular capitalism is property, savings, and stocks. These programs were almost the description of popular capitalism in those times. So, addressing the thing of what to do. I think there are no answers here, no simple answer, but I think some things are, for me at least, more or less clear. One thing is you have to regulate differently things that are different. We cannot speak of a housing market as if the product was the building. We have lots of things happening in relation with that land and that construction over the land. But of course we cannot regulate in the same way that if that is being used for long-term housing or just as an asset or a financial asset or a high-end tourism. They are different products, so they have to have different regulations. It's now, how do you put one over the other, and how do you do this? It's not easy to find the equilibrium, but you cannot start the conversation as if these different things were the same. And what happens here is when now, for instance, the government is saying, let's push the taxes higher for tourism and lower for long-term rental market. The landowners are starting to react, but we have to remember that first they did the other way around. There was a moment when the tax for tourism, short-term, how do you say? Short-term rentals, in terms of 5%, and long-term housing rental was 28%, and everyone finds this to be normal. Because again, you are eating different sectors. When you said 5% for short-term rental, you were creating a policy of incentives to boost the economy. And you have, and the housing, if you ask, and the Secretary of Housing was saying what? It didn't exist. It was invented in 2017. We didn't have the sector in the government. And that relates with what Filippo was saying. these incentives and these systems many times do not work because the government is used to work with incentives, so they are always giving away the same slice of the pie. So I remember as you were talking, I have some stories of that. I was making a plan for a rehabilitation area, and so I then talking with the investors, and exactly the same thing. Come here and invest here because you have these incentives, and they say, it's not for me. I'm a business. I don't pay those incentives. But I have another thing, which was talking with a mediator of the real estate mediator, and when I was talking about all these changes on the taxes, etc., she said to me, it doesn't work that way, because every small, really tiny person, not a big company, that has 1 or 2 short-term rentals, I know how to make them a company that does not pay anything. So you can't say, I'm going to put the rates, the taxes higher for those people. You are not, because if they are companies, they don't pay. And everyone is a company. It's easier to make. So what I'm saying is,
There's nothing to...
no, there is. One thing is, these systems of benefits, etc., they are complex, and many times who is designing the laws is working in sectoral systems, and they are creating a system of benefits that is overlapping with the system of benefit that was created in the office on the other side of the building, with other mindset, with other goals, and things have to be seen in the complexity and put together. Now, in mais habitação, in the last package of measures on this area, that one is chaotic, but some of those things were they took away some of the benefits that were overlapping with the others, and they created others that starting overlapping now, but that's another thing. So one thing is to control this complexity. Another thing is to regulate differently what's different. And another thing is, as Patricia was saying, understand that rental market is or should be, and all this complexity of tourism changed the mindset of a number of players. Traditionally, the rental market was a long-term, low-risk system. It was a marathon, not a sprint. And this system changed the mindset of many players. Some days ago, I was saying like the comments of the newspaper, and there was a landowner criticizing the measures because they were saying that in this way, the rents he was receiving would not pay, and he was very angry with that, the credit he made to buy the building. Of course, it was not supposed. If you make your tenant pay your credit, it was not supposed to work that way. If that was the case, you could buy it. It was, but it created this environment, and you have to first change it, but mainly create a system of a regulating system that works both for tenants and for landowners, but mainly that creates this idea of a low risk, and low risk is important, long-term situation. If the rules change every year, you won't have no investor, no actor, and no tenant that wants to enter this thing. In both ends, no landlord will invest, but no tenant will enter the rental market, because at this moment, I don't know if in the next year my rent will be this amount or the double. It's just chaotic, so no one enters that market. And last thing is then public supports, being subsidies or building or whatever, but I think that regulating in different ways things that are different and creating a system that recreates or pushes this idea of a long-term, low-risk system. It's a really basic thing, but it's a thing that at this moment we do not have, at least here. It's completely the other way around. The rental market at this moment is the riskiest, no, for the tenant. Yeah, it's completely.
Okay, so
And yet the rental market is growing. I mean, people are going to the rent because they cannot buy, and they need. Yeah, anyway, no, but the growth of the rental market increased before, increasing cost of credit for any number of reasons, for mobility, for social reasons, etc. So, I mean, my thing will be just do not be so realistic that we fall into cynicism. I mean, especially in a moment in which those people owning one property, that when the value doubles has no impact whatsoever on their life, because on the paper they have a double value, but in fact it's their house where they live, so what they're going to do with their wealth, and not being able to help their children to get a house, whether in the rental or on the property market. So I don't think that framework, 75% are honest, so we cannot do. Most of the owners just own one property and they cannot help their children in entering there. So I think there is absolutely space for a completely different political framework for pushing changes in this market. And that's the framework up until 2013, 14. Now it's completely changed, and I think there is space for changing completely the political understanding of housing. Hope.
Okay, so we have more or less complete diagnosis of the Portuguese situation, some prescriptions also, so there is hope. Let's have lunch and return at 3 p.m., okay? Good lunch. We will meet. It's the same as yesterday, so we pick up at the cafeteria and we can go to the 5th floor to use that big table and gather there, okay? Thank you.